Welcome to the number one podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
You just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're going to lose. Coming down the stretch, you're going to lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, here to discuss MSU's 76-66 win against the Golden Gophers from Minnesota. Before we begin, I'd like to mention once again that we're trying to resolve the issue with Spotify. I feel like I get an email just about every day, which is a sign that people figure out a way to get a hold of me. But it also shows that there's a problem still. And so Spotify created a new show to those of you who had subscribed before. You'll no longer see it in your feed unless you resubscribe, and you can see there are actually 3 shows when you search for it now. I realize I'm probably speaking to those who figured this out. But if you know someone who used Spotify as a fan of the show, please tell them and send some email to Spotify. Maybe they'll fix the problem coming from you. We've certainly sent our emails to them. Also, you can visit our website, thefinalfoursnottheschedule.com, and sign up for email notifications or on Substack, where you will get emailed version of the show. That way you won't miss any. Finally, I've now included all of our sponsors on our support page. So not only can you find ways to support the show financially, but if you're wondering how to get an estimate from Squeegee Squad, or you're like, hey, what are those guys, the brothers that just do ditches? Or, you can go and find all the links there, and you can actually get all the, you can get access to everybody who sponsors the show. There are also ways to access affiliate deals we offer to get some discounts if you want to sign for Podbean, which we've been pretty happy with. They've been actually very good customer service in case you want to launch your own podcast. Or Element, and LMNT is a flavored electrolyte replacement powder that you can simply add to water to help you recover faster. It has sodium, potassium, magnesium, no calories like with Gatorade or other sports drinks. So I use it personally. It's not a medical advice, but just I use it because I intermittently fast. And it helps keep me from getting headaches, so I just have like 16 ounces in the morning. I'm good to go until I eat dinner, whenever it is. So anyway, the link will give you a free variety pack of the salts with any order. A good deal. All right, as for the game, it was one that was way closer than it looked in the final score. It did not feel like a 10-point victory. I think it was tied with like 3 minutes left or 3.5 minutes left. It took Tyson Walker going on a personal 8-0 run, and then 12 last 14 for the Michigan State to pull away from a pesky Minnesota team, missing their starting point guard, who was in a boot. By the numbers, it was strange. Michigan State had 9 turnovers to 19 from Minnesota, which you'd expect a much larger margin of victory. But Michigan State shot 25% from 3 versus a Michigan State team shooting 35%, and actually was 50% for most of the game, despite a team coming in shooting 27% for the year. Points in the paint were a huge edge for Michigan State. I think it was like 46-12 or something like that. It was quite dramatic. And again, you'd expect quite a big difference in the game. Michigan State fast break points 17-2 in favor, and I think that's probably pretty accurate. So and obviously the free throw edge, Michigan State had trouble hitting any shots and shot 15-23 from the line. So I don't know. In summary, it's either a game where you could say, hey, they showed their grit, they found a way to win, or they showed how vulnerable they are to have it be that close to a team that they should handle, I think, pretty easily, especially missing their dynamic point guard.
Well, I would say this. I think that it's important to win games where you don't play well.
I agree.
And they did that. We have had games where Michigan State didn't play particularly well this year and lost, close losses, let's say, at times, but losses nonetheless. So that's one positive to take out of this. There were a lot of things that Michigan State did very well. You mentioned some of them, and we'll return to talk about some of those in more detail. But there were other things that were not good. And the total picture that I'm left with, I think, out of this one is glad for the win because it would have been, awful if they'd lost this.
Yeah, that would have been tough to recover. Yeah, right. For sure.
Glad to see Michigan State just take a game by the throat late and close it out, which they did at both ends. That was good to see. And also understand that they're going to need to play markedly better on Sunday to get a win on the road at Maryland. So all of those things can be true simultaneously, and I think they are. So that's where I land on this. Disappointing in some respects, and you talked about Elijah Hawkins missing the game. That's a huge. It's not something we knew about when we did the preview, but it popped up. It was yesterday, maybe. Both he and Farrell Payne were questionable. Now Payne played, although he didn't get a lot done. But Hawkins being out of there, that was a big, big difference for them. And while they have not been a great team taking care of the ball anyway, even with him, they've had problems. I do think, when I look at this and say, well, they had 19 turnovers, some of that's attributable to not having their point guard. I think that's pretty clear. It's also, you're also left to wonder how much, because again, as we talked about, Hawkins isn't just a guy. He's a player who creates opportunities for teammates, Yeah.
Leads the country in assists, I think, doesn't he?
Right, second. He came into when we do the preview, at least, he was second. And has a fantastic assist-to-turnover ratio. I think it's 3-1. So he's a playmaker. He makes them better offensively. So you have to wonder, how much better would they have been with him? Now, all that said, they overachieved offensively without him. The free throw shooting finally came crashing back to earth, and they ended up 65%, which is striking because there was a point they were 75, 80%.
I think they were like 16 for 18, I felt like, for a while.
And then they were 15 for 20 at one point. They might have gone a little better than that, maybe 16 for 21. And then it just collapsed on them, and they came back to earth. The three-point shooting, as you mentioned, it ended up at 35%, which is just a little better, a couple percentage points better than they shoot on the season. So it doesn't look that out of whack, but they were killing it for long stretches of the game, and then that kind of came back to earth. So, I could counter with that. On the one hand, you think, well, without your point guard, of course, you would have been better with him offensively, and that's probably true. But I could also counter and say, well, how much better would you have shot from three or overall? I mean, they were 48% in the first half. That dipped to 38.5 in the second half. So they ended up 43, which is good, not spectacular. Would they have been a lot better? I don't know. But clearly it affected them. I think the turnovers is the single biggest number that shows you how much of an impact it had. And that was critical because Michigan State managed to score 21 points off turnovers. Yeah. That's a lot. That's a lot of point production off turnovers. And in a 10-point game, that's a big deal. So, yeah, it's a tough one to know how to feel definitively about because at first blush, I don't feel great about it, about the way Michigan State played, particularly defensively. But then I got to consider, I don't think, and I'm not positive of this, but I want to say I think Minnesota might have gone 0 from the floor over the last 7 minutes of that game. I don't know if I'm trying to remember.
If 1 for 9 or something, but they're pretty bad. Yeah,
I don't think they scored from the floor. I'm pretty sure everything was from the line. I'm not positive, but it was a long stretch. There was at least a 5.5 minute stretch. Basically, I know this. If they didn't score from the floor over the last minute 30, they didn't score over the last 7 minutes from the floor. It was all free throws. So that's something to be it's impressive, even if you're not playing a great offensive team, to hold the team down for that long a stretch. Hey, you're playing good defensive basketball, right? But,
Yeah.
Overall, I didn't feel great about the MSU defense. Offensively, MSU had a great first half. I mean, in the first half, they shot 48.6%. Second half, they dipped to 40. They still ended up 45%. So that's a decent number, but the three-point shooting wasn't there tonight, and the free throw shooting was abysmal. And although they rallied to actually get it up to a semi-human 65%, but there was a long stretch of that game where they were battling around 50%. And, so you never, speaking for myself, I never felt like they were great offensively either. There were certain things they did well at times, like getting the ball to the rim in the paint, but it just, I don't know. It was a weird game. It was a weird game.
Yeah, I totally agree.
That I just couldn't, I found myself stunned at certain points that it was as close as it was, but then you say, okay, well, Minnesota's making enough plays. I mean, the three really, if we get right down to it, for a long stretch of that game, the reason Minnesota was competitive boiled down to two things: their ability to hit the three and Michigan State's inability to hit free throws. And those two things really kept it closer than it had any right to be, which is why it felt frustrating and weird, because I thought watching it, it was pretty clear Michigan State was the significantly better team, but it wasn't playing out that way on the scoreboard. And that happens sometimes. So that's why I also get back to one of the points I made earlier, which is, look, the bottom line is when you're not at your best, you just got to find a way to win. And they did that. And so it doesn't leave you coming away from this game feeling great or thinking that they're ready to go into West Lafayette and upset Purdue or anything like that. But it is what good teams that want to be good have to do. And they did it. At both ends, they did it. So, hats off to them for that. And I guess we can talk about some of the players and go from there.
Yeah. Well, I guess the only thing I'd add is that, in some ways it's good to play a game like this where you've probably come in fairly confident that you're going to get not an easy win, but you're not going to work super hard. And they had to really fight for it. And so, maybe that'll help them be more focused, I guess, going forward in against these stretch. Because I'm sure they're in the same thing we were thinking. Oh, this is a time to go on a run of 8, 9, 10 games maybe even, and get back in the race for the Big Ten. I mean, it's not totally over, but you can't really trip up anywhere. And I think you can kind of just look past games. And this would be one you could look past. Oh, we're at home. It should be, And I think Michigan State definitely benefited from some calls. I looked up at the clock. I'm like, holy cow, there's 11.5 minutes left in the game, and State's already the double bonus. That's gonna be a long time in the.
I think that was earned. I mean, Minnesota, their response to Hawkins being out was to go big, and they played a very physical brand of basketball, and you could see the emphasis on getting, particularly in the second half. It seemed oftentimes the whole game plan was like, just fling this thing. Sorry about that. Fling this thing at the rim and then go get it. It reminded me of like 1998 Michigan State.
Right.
Not that they were that good, but as good as that Michigan State team at it, but you get what I mean. And and it worked to some extent. I mean, I don't have the breakdown of offensive rebounds by half, but they ended the game with 10. I'm going to guess at least 6 or 7 of those had to have come in the second half. It was much more impactful in the second half.
Are you talking about Minnesota?
Yeah. Minnesota's offensive rebounding.
Well, I think Garcia had like 3 in one possession.
He had 2 in one possession.
Off his miss. 3 shots.
Yeah, he missed, and then he got his own rebound. Yeah. And so that was, they were playing very physically. They were playing very hard. But I guess you could say, well, I have an MSU bias, and certainly that's true. But I don't recall the one call that I thought Michigan State got a big break on, honestly, was Trey Holloman in a transition play. They called a goaltending where on the replays it looked questionable.
Yeah.
That was it. Now, the foul calls, they had one guy foul out. Payne was in foul trouble pretty much the whole game. But that was earned. I mean,
yeah. I guess there's the one play I was just thinking with Holloman was coming across it. I don't know if he just like ran into someone was screening, and I think he just sort of tripped, and they called a foul on Minnesota. I just felt like, that's kind of one of those home calls you get. But
I don't remember that one. You might be right. But
there are a lot of. I mean, it's just one of there are just these games sometimes where just a lot of whistles, and this was one of those games. Then there's a stretch for like 4 straight possessions where both teams are bricking it and going at it and under the boards, and lots of contact, guys falling down, and no fouls called. I mean, like, I don't know what's a foul and what's not a foul in this game.
Well, that's the thing. What you have to hope for is consistency in officiating.
Yeah.
That's really all you can ask for. If they're going to call it tight, fine, call it consistently tight, and vice versa. If they're going to let them play, then don't start calling touch fouls with 5 minutes to go.
Right.
And but I mean, there certainly were segments like that, but I think by and large, they were not letting. I mean, it was still a physical game, but I think the fouls that were called, I don't have a lot of complaints with many of them either way.
No, I think I agree. I think there's generally kind of.
I think Minnesota had no choice. This is
they
had
to make an ugly game.
Yeah, and so that's what they were going to do. The one thing they had was they had some size, and their whole team actually followed that lead and played very, very physically. It was interesting. I don't know if you caught this, but there was one brief segment. It probably only lasted maybe one possession or two at the most, where they had Payne back in because he had 4 fouls for most of the second half. So they had brought him back in playing alongside Garcia. So they started the game. They were going ultra big. And Michigan State had a segment where they had Mahdi and Carson out there at the same time. No Malik. It was Mahdi and Carson, and then it was Tyson, AJ, and I can't remember whether it was Jaden or Trey, but that combination of guards. That was the lineup. And it was specifically to match Minnesota's size. It had to be. Now, they didn't stick with it.
Right.
But that had to be the reason in my mind is that, I don't know, maybe Izzo was getting tired of watching Minnesota just tattoo them on the offensive glass or what it was. But he made that move. I thought that was interesting because we have not seen Carson. I don't know if I've seen him play minutes at the 4 all year this season. We saw it some last year in the tournament down the stretch of the regular season. I don't think we've seen it yet this year. So that was.
I think you're right. Yeah, because they generally have gone to Carr. I mean, that's sort of been the decision.
Carr,
and
occasionally
they didn't
Booker.
hear.
Right. Occasionally Booker. But, I think they probably figured, hey, down the stretch, man, we got to get stops and we got to get rebounds. And those guys are not our best option for either one of those things. Where Carson is. So I think that was probably why, but I found that was interesting.
Well, I guess, if we start going through players, I think, Tyson was Tyson. They were really, really physical and doing everything they could to prevent him from getting the ball and getting even on the screens. They didn't bother, even covering this roll man, which is smart. I don't think you really need to oftentimes, especially with all the size they had. And so he wasn't really able to get much going until the very end of the game. But he did what he does, right? He only had 2 threes. He had attempts. He just hit one of them. 7 of 13 from the field, 21 points, 6 of 7 from the line, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, a turnover. I mean, and 3 steals. So pretty good game from him, considering that they obviously, he was their player to keep in the gutter.
Correct. And for a lot of that game, that happened. They were actually, as I think back on it, one thing that maybe one point you could make is, and you alluded to it, Minnesota was very physical with Tyson. To the point that I did think there was some holding going on that maybe wasn't called. I know Izzo was frustrated by it at times, to put it mildly. But I think what this game illustrates is that Michigan State has a guy, and I think we know this because we've seen him do it on occasion before, but Michigan State has a guy that is capable of closing games, because that's what Tyson did. He shut the door on this. It was possession after possession after possession where he was either getting fouled and converting free throws or he was hitting shots. He had the one play, which was just fantastic, where he got past his man, got into the middle of the lane, and just I think he threw a crossover, if I remember correctly, at Dawson Garcia, and just kind of that put him into all kinds of open space. And then he hit that semi-reverse layup that you see him do pretty frequently. And that was just kind of a wow moment in this game. And he's done that to other people this year. So Dawson Garcia shouldn't feel badly. He got his pants taken down on him in front of the Breast Center crowd, but it's happened to other people.
Did Tyson intentionally? So I was at my wife asking this at least in the arena and then watching the replay. It certainly looked like that one play Tyson it looked like he couldn't get run of the defender, so he just threw it off the backboard and then got his own rebound. And
sure looked that way to me.
It looked like he passed it to himself. Okay, it didn't look like it was blocked or anything.
He had two moments that I think, I'm glad you brought that up, because aside from the crossover, which is a more conventional great Tyson moment, there were two moments in this game that were, did he just do that kind of moments. That was one to have. And you'll see guys occasionally do that, but not 6'1" guys. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. Right.
You will see guys on rare occasions will use the backboard basically to put themselves in a better position to score. That does happen occasionally, but you rarely see a guy his size do it. That was a very savvy play. And maybe I'm wrong about this, but I thought it was intentional. It sure looked that way.
It looked like it.
Because of how immediately he tracked it,
Yeah.
That's what's telling about it. And the second one was in the first half. It was a play where he was going down in transition one-on-one against Cam Christie.
Hogard, yeah.
And at first, it kind of looked like just a bad shot attempt. But the more you looked at it, no. He was passing the ball. He was putting it up there because he knew he had AJ. I'm not sure he knew AJ was going to catch it for a dunk, but he was definitely trying to get the ball to AJ. I'm convinced of it.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
So those were two really impressive plays by him that were very unconventional. You're not going to see every game. You might not see again this season, but they were big. And yeah, he's Michigan State's best player. And when it was winning time, he played like their best player. That's all you can really ask for.
Yeah. And another one, good players from Michigan State was AJ Hogard. He was 4-10 from the field, 0 for 1 for 3, but he had 4 defensive rebounds, 2 steals, 7 assists, a turnover, that one bad turnover. But overall played a really solid floor game. I think, he was as guilty as anyone else, as all the guards, I think, struggling to close out in the threes. And so you can definitely ding him for that. But overall, I thought he played a really good game.
Offensively, I agree with you. I thought he was pretty good in this game. I will say this. I think it was his worst game finishing in a while. Now, I understand Minnesota's got size. So that can be a problem when you're trying to finish, but he was 4 for 10 from the floor. He probably should have been 6 or 7 for 10, honestly, because there were several layups that were not really, it wasn't like the ball was deflected or he got a shot blocked. He got to the rim, with some traffic, but those are plays we're used to AJ finishing, and he didn't finish them. That's a small knock. I think you can't argue with 7 assists to 1 turnover. I thought he was good there. He chipped in with 4 defensive rebounds. That was good. As you say, there were certainly issues defensively, but, we're recording this obviously fairly soon after the game. I haven't had a chance to see what Tom Izzo had to say. And we'll return to this in a minute when we start going through the keys. When you looked at Minnesota, I think the obvious thing was, you got to stop them in the interior. That's really where you got to, we said that, right?
Yeah.
And,
right. Yeah.
And I think the way Minnesota shot early in this game, and really up until the last, 6-7 minutes was unexpected.
Yeah.
And I don't know. And I'm just trying to be fair to Michigan State's guards. I am guessing that there will be dissatisfaction on the way Michigan State handled a lot of their screening action, because they were really getting, and it wasn't even so much pick and roll at the top of the key. It was stuff, it was oftentimes a lot of stuff diagonally that they got hurt on. But I don't know. It's possible that it was a game plan thing that Michigan State it was not allowing them. They were following the game plan, but Michigan State was just not able to extend to shooters, and then for whatever reason they didn't adjust until late. But I'll be interested to hear what Israel has to say about it. I'm suspecting that it's mostly dissatisfaction with his team's defensive effort, but it
That's
was
Izzo too,
knowing what you had to worry about coming into this game, and then conversely, seeing what Minnesota was doing to them, it at least led me to wonder, that might have been, maybe the thinking was, look, we gotta worry about the interior. We got to worry about it's not like their guards are tremendous penetrators, but that might have been some of it, to say we're not going to be as aggressive getting to shooters. The thing was, a lot of the guys who did damage, though, if you look at it, let me take a quick look here. So
Christie was 2 of 4, I think.
Yeah, Mitchell was 3 for 9, but that got
but
a
he's
lot
probably
worse.
3 for 5.
That got a lot worse late. Yeah. So
Yeah.
when it was humming, Mitchell and Christie were the guys hitting shots, and those are their 2 best shooters, other than
Garcia. I think Garcia's hit
Ola
was
Joseph.
early too.
He hit one very early, yeah, and that was a whatever. Guys shoot 20%.
Yeah, but I think that was sort of all in that big flurry.
And Carrington hits one, and he came in 17%. So this is what's leading me to wonder if there was a game plan issue, and he's not as hot with those guys, because if there wasn't, then yeah, absolutely, you would say, hey, those looks were too good. But again, with Mitchell and Cam Christie, those are guys you have to be aware of.
Yeah,
you can't let
both 30s. Yeah.
Well, we'll return to it in the keys. I talked about Mike Mitchell, right? During that 3 for 5 flurry, I said this is the downside, and then the way he closed, it's like this is also what happens. And he took a couple awful shots down the stretch too. Yeah. Really bad shot selection. But again, that's kind of who he is. He's sort of it's not quite like Tominaga style, but it's feast or famine. And they had a little bit of both during that game from him. So anyway, I'm mostly with it. I thought it was a decent game from AJ. There were definitely some things he did better than he's done recently, and that's playmaking in particular. That's good to see, but you'd like a little better defense and a little better finishing.
Right. And just to sort of put a bow on what you were saying, Minnesota 2 of 9 in the second half, and I do think that Michigan State made some adjustments at halftime.
They did
from the 3 defense, and so I think you're probably right. There's some strategic reasons, and it's sort of like, hey guys, we say back off, but maybe not these guys, right? So I think there's probably a little bit of that.
I think so, and again, that would still be MSU's fault, because that would be a recognition thing. So
right. Well, and maybe is it time for us to stop complaining about Malik Hall? Now, I know you and I are not complaining about Malik Hall, but it's sort of like this general sort of inconsistent. And
it won't be.
He had a bad game in Northwestern, but I mean, this guy has been solid. I mean, if it weren't for Malik Hall, they'd have been down 10 points or 15 in that second half. I mean, he was just keeping them in it. I mean, 6 or 12 from the field, 1 or 2 for 3, which puts him over 30% now for the season. 3 or 4 from line. He had 12 rebounds, 3 of them offensive, 4 assists, no turnovers, 16 points. I mean, those aren't bad lines. And he was guarding their best player and doing pretty well, I think, generally.
Yeah, I didn't think he was the guy that got exploited very often by Garcia.
It was usually... Yeah,
it was other guys. Yes, it was other guys. Look, that was other than him fouling out, that was a really good game by Malik Hall. I mean, I thought the way he started with 6 quick points early, and doing it inside, posting up, very, very encouraging to see. I thought, there were a couple of moments. There was a fadeaway that I thought he was clearly, one thing we talked about in the preview with Coach Garland was
that one fadeaway. I know.
You got to be, with a post player, it's important that they're on their spot. They are in a spot on the floor where they're comfortable. And I thought Malik was pretty clearly a step or two further out than he optimally wants to be on that shot. Not that he can't hit it. It's just that was a baseline turnaround that didn't feel good to me watching it. There was another play where they got him the ball kind of trailing in transition, and he didn't pull up. He tried to take the ball all the way to the rim, and I think it ended, I can't remember if it was a turnover or a missed shot, but either way, it was a bad result. Other than that, he was a load. I mean, and look, unfortunately, my answer to your question for the fan base at large is no, because Malik Hall has, let's put it this way, he would have to play these types of games from now till the end of the regular season to get that kind of pass, because he's just become the whipping boy based on inconsistency. And you know what? Look, I'm not going to say everybody's wrong. Just in the same way that I didn't feel last year that people who had problems with Joey Hauser were 100% in the wrong. Those guys, Joey had been inconsistent earlier in his career. Malik has been inconsistent at times in his career. There's no arguing that. But this is 5 of 6 now. And truthfully, even before that, I think he was playing pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, he's Stony Brook. He had 9 points, but he didn't have to do much. He's 4 of 8,
Some of those games, the production was not because he wasn't playing well. It was just the flow of the game. But Malik is not Tyson. If you look at Tyson, Tyson's a guy that you say, hey, there's probably not a game that Michigan State could play in which they don't need Tyson to be among their leading scorers. That's the nature of the role he plays for this team. That's not entirely true for Malik. It is possible for Malik Hall to play well and not be putting up 14, 15, 16 points. Now, he can't do what he did against Northwestern. Nobody's going to argue with that. But that's one game in a stretch where he's been, I mean, is 5 of 6 enough to say, well, he's playing pretty consistently? I think so. I think he's playing the best basketball of his Michigan State career. And it's not even just the production. It's the way he's playing. So he is giving Michigan, what did we say? Michigan State had 44 points in the paint. Now, those weren't all Malik Hall, but he set the tone, and the vast majority of his production came there. Yeah. So he's giving them an element that this team lacked otherwise, that everybody's been lamenting post threat. Well, now I think you've got one. Now, is he, a Zach Edey post threat? No, of course not. But is he a credible low post player that will force defenses to deal with him off by doubling or whatever? Or if they don't, he's going to get you points. Yes, I think so. And he's also, by the way, I'll also add this: 4 assists, 0 turnovers.
Yeah, right.
And he doesn't make spectacular assists, but Malik Hall, that's your 4-man. So you get, and I forget what his numbers are exactly, but they are way tilted in the assist end of the ratio for him. I want to say he's operating at least a 2-to-1 level. It might be better than that.
Do you want to know what they are?
Sure.
41 assists, 17 turnovers.
Holy
so more than 2-to-1.
That's about 2.5. That's right about 2.5 to 1. That's your 4-man. That doesn't, you take a look around at other 4-men around the league. You're not going to see those kind of numbers, I'm telling you. So very, very impressive stuff from him in that regard. And you know who was doing that stuff last year at that position? Kind of a similar way? Joey Hauser. Now he's not, yeah, how about that? So he's not Joey Hauser stylistically, but
no.
I think at the outset of this season, I know we talked about this, that our feeling was he's not the same player stylistically as Joey Hauser, but in totality, he is capable of making similar kinds of contributions to a winning team. He's not going to be a 45% three-point shooter and take a bunch of them. And he hasn't been, and he doesn't take a bunch of them. But he's a better low post player than Joey ever was. He's a better defender than Joey ever was. And I think he's become at least as good a rebounder as Joey was. And he's a better offensive rebounder. Joey was an exceptional defensive rebounder last year, really, really good. But Malik is a better offensive rebounder. And I think in totality, what do you have, 3 tonight? So
He had 4.
he had 4. No,
Wait,
3.
offensive. He had 3
3
right.
offensive
Yeah,
rebounds.
3.
So this is, a double-double where he also has 4 assists to 0 turnovers. That's a pretty good day's work.
So you want to know what Joey Hauser was last year?
Sure.
Assists to turnovers?
Sure.
61 assists, 50 turnovers.
Wow. So
And he averaged 7 rebounds a game.
And that's still
That's
good.
not bad.
That's still good for a 4-man. I'm just saying what Malik is doing quietly, because nobody talks about it, is really exceptional. You normally expect your 4-man, it's not like a 5, but you normally expect your 4-man to be a negative ratio guy. Maybe not awful, but it will frequently happen. There are unicorns. I'm going to get Coleman Hawkins. I don't think is at Illinois. I'm watching him right now as we're talking. Put Michigan away. So that's what brought him to mind. But I'll guarantee there are a lot of other 4-men around the Big Ten that are negative. I'm pretty sure of that.
And Hall was last year. Hall was,
right.
He was,
right.
He was
right. And he was more of a 3-man. So it's pretty remarkable. And I think just another thing that people don't talk about, but that is true, an area where he's making very, very positive contributions to this team,
Oh, I was just going to say, looking at others, looking at Jaden Akins, 5-14 from the field, 0 for 5 from 3, which is one that thing you really noticed. He had one really bad 3, and the other 4, he just missed them, but he missed them. Missed his front end of a free throw, 2 rebounds, offensive rebounds, 2 assists, no turnovers, a steal, 10 points. So he managed to still contribute, but definitely not one of his better games. But he wasn't like terrible.
Tough shooting night, but I do like the fact. I do like the fact that at different times he was aggressive in taking the ball to the rim and getting things done there. So the fact that his jumper was not falling didn't. Sometimes guys who are shooters will fall into that my next one's going to go thing. And I thought that the fact that he focused enough to look to take the ball to the basket and finish was important. I mean, they got 10 big points out of him. He wasn't an efficient game, but he gave him enough production that, you can feel okay about it.
And he was active. Like there's that, especially that one play, I think what highlights that is that it was an offensive rebound opportunity for Minnesota, and he ran out and basically sort of spiked it off the guy's face out of bounds, and so it was a turnover, a defensive rebound.
And I think, unlike some other games, like if you go back to the Northwestern game where everybody was disappointed, Michigan State did not match Northwestern's physicality and toughness. They just didn't. Minnesota played a very physical game, but I thought Michigan State did a very good job of responding, which we'll talk about again when we get to the keys. But I thought Michigan State did a pretty good job tonight in matching that, and that's evidenced by things like play you're talking about, by the offensive rebounding numbers. There's certain, there are tangible and intangible ways that showed up.
And then moving on to Mady Sissoko, 22 minutes, 1 for 2 from the field, 3 for 8 from the line. So a bad night for him from the line. He falls all the way down to 71% now for the season from the free throw line. 4 offensive rebounds, 5 overall, 2 assists, a turnover, a block, just 5 points. But I was shocked that he only had 5 rebounds. I felt like he had about 10. He was a force inside, especially in the second half. But he was affecting all those plays.
If you buy that offensive rebounds really count for 2, it would be, right? That would be 8 instead of 4. Look, I thought the shame of it is that he ends the game with 5 points. He could have easily been in double digits if he shot free throws the way he has all year. For whatever reason, they were not going. And honestly, they looked bad. They were bad.
He's the
bad
reason their
misses.
numbers look so bad this game. I mean, he missed 5 of them.
The flip side of that is that it was evidence of how active Madi was.
Right.
I thought in that respect, he was pretty good. He was active. He was working. It just, the free throws weren't falling, but boy, he was getting there. So I don't have a problem with that. I thought he competed. There were times, as you alluded to, I thought Garcia got a lot done when Madi was guarding. Madi and Carson were guarding him.
Yeah.
In the second half, during that stretch where Garcia was really the only thing they had going. So maybe not the greatest defensive game from him in that respect. You would hope he'd put up a little more resistance than we saw, but I'm okay with the effort level for sure.
Yeah.
And by the way, did I win the rebounding thing this time? Because I think I had.
We'll talk about that in a little bit. I think before you can start gloating. Yeah. So,
all right.
Carson Cooper, his counterpart, he has 2 for 5 from the field, hit both his free throws, had a couple rebounds and a turnover, 6 points. I think just like Madi, I think he competed really at a high level. I do think in my opinion, there's definitely Madi is plus what Cooper is. I'm not saying Cooper will be. I think Cooper will be better by the time he's a senior, but I still think Madi is better on the floor, just competing inside. I think maybe that's just because of his size and just his strength.
Yeah, I think, look, Carson's made real improvement with his body, and there's no question that he is stronger in a way that shows up in the game. But I will admit, I thought he might have made a little more progress coming into this season. I think I think I agree with you. I think in totality, I probably feel like Madi's a little more consistent defensively. Carson definitely has a potential to get there and maybe even beyond. And he the other thing about Carson is Carson can make some loud plays. He had 2 of them in this game. He had a great rim run in transition. And then he had another play where they did a great job after, I think it was a possession or 2 earlier against the zone. Carson got loose and blew the dunk. Now, granted, it was contested, but you got to convert those, and he didn't. But very shortly thereafter, he was a recipient of a very good pass by Xavier Booker, who's played in the middle of the zone, found him baseline, and he just went straight to the rim and flushed it. So he only had 6 points. Those were his only 2 buckets from the field, the 2 dunks I mentioned. But they were both loud plays, which is something that he's capable of doing. So I was okay. Again, just like with Madi, maybe not a great effort in the second half. It's funny because in the first half, I thought they did a really good job with Garcia. And then Garcia did, I didn't see the splits, but what did he end up with? He had 21 points?
Yeah, something like that.
I'm going to guess 22. I'm going to guess maybe 14 of them, 16 of them came in the second half?
I think that's probably pretty close.
The majority came in the second half, so.
Mostly at the line, it seems like.
A lot at the line, but again, those were legit fouls, and they were, for the most part. And I don't think MSU did as good a job in handling him. So, and as we've talked about, I didn't think much of that was actually on Malik. So I think it was mostly on Madi and Carson. So that would be one negative for them. But Carson, as I said, he made some nice contributions to this win. A couple loud plays offensively.
And I think Trey played a good game defensively as usual. Sort of his usual self. 3 for 7 at the field. 50. He shot 1 of 2 for 3. Hit his 1 free throw. Had a rebound. 2 assists. No turnovers. And a steal. That's sort of typical line for him.
Beat goes on.
He just keeps getting closer to the 6 to turnover ratio.
It wasn't like a banner shooting game for Trey, but I'll tell you, he had that 1-3 to beat the zone when they were really struggling and they needed it. Yeah. And then he had another one of his field goals was a strong. It was the other because then the other one was the other one was the goaltending that I didn't think was goaltend. But he had another one, I think, earlier in the game. Very strong take to the rim and finish, which is great to see. Now, the threes are great. They're nice. It's all good. They need it from him. But when I feel like he's really engaged is when he's starting to play downhill. And that is, he showed it on that play. So showed it on the goaltend too, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, decent night for him. I did think in a night where I didn't think the guards were great defensively anyway, again, pending anything about game plan oriented stuff that maybe explains some of it. I thought Trey looked to be the best of the group to me tonight. That was my feeling watching. I thought he was a little more aggressive. And yet at the same time, I didn't feel like he was getting beat as readily.
Yeah. I guess finally, we just kind of mentioned briefly, Cone Carr had a couple turns. He played 9 minutes, 1 for 2 from the field. He had one rebound and a steal. So,
yeah.
He's impactful in his athleticism. It definitely makes a difference. He had that block, which turned out to be a goaltend. I don't know. I mean, it was good.
With Cohen right now, I think when you're talking about offensive production, and it wasn't the case tonight, but normally it is. Normally what you're talking about is he needs the other guys he's playing with to create those situations for him, right? So he's not typically a guy who's going to go off the dribble against somebody. He's not going to hit a three. I'm going to take a three. He needs to be in transition where somebody finds him for a lob. A guard makes a nice play to create an opportunity for him at the rim. It's that kind of stuff that we need to see. And that really didn't happen tonight. There was one play I was really frustrated by. Malik had the ball. It was in the second. I think it was in the second half. No, sorry, it was in the first half. Thinking about which end they were. It was in the first half. Malik had the ball, and they kind of double teamed him. And I think he saw Jaden on the arc, but he had Cohen. And he probably just didn't see him. All would have taken was Malik to lob the ball at the rim, and it gets flushed, and he just missed it. But that's what I'm talking about. Cohen typically needs plays made for him, and then he's a play finisher for sure. Tonight, he actually did the basket he made was really a play that he kind of made on his own. And you saw him try to attack the lane maybe a little bit more frequently than we've gotten used to. But I still think on balance, that's going to be the step that I would imagine he's focusing on in preparation for next year. So that's going to be this off season is, hey, you need to find a comfort level with creating some offensive chances for yourself. Because right now it's not really there.
Yeah, he needs to find a place where he can receive the ball and feel like he can drive from there. He probably is not three-point line driving all the way in, but maybe like if he sort of gets part in the lane or something. And then finally, Jackson and Xavier both had 2 minutes. Booker had an assist and Kohler had a rebound. I don't know not much else to say beyond that. Not their game.
This was just not, it was just not a game for them. I think that, with Book, it was going to be, you certainly wouldn't want to match him on Garcia. And so then if he's matched up against Payne, well, there's a real physical discrepancy there. Same thing for Jackson. Yeah. And if Payne's out of the game, then Minnesota's going small ball, and that creates issues for those two guys as well. And in Jackson's case, actually, the minutes he played were at the 5. And, he's not really he's not ready to handle either of those for different reasons, either of those guys Minnesota throws out there at that position.
All right. Well, since you are so antsy, we'll go ahead and talk about the Squeegee Squad, which makes you say player best clean the glass, brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. If you need your glass cleaned, they're the guys to call. If you're in the Grand Rapids metro area, I'd say they'll come out in every weather, and that's not true because they did not come up to my house because it was like I said, it was about 10 degrees out here, and so all they do is just put ice in my windows. So They will be coming out next week, but they'll get a nice clean streak-free, clean on your windows. They get right up on your windows on their ladders, so they're not like a long ways away, so that way they can make sure it's nice and clean. They can do the interior, they'll do the screens, they'll do the windowsills, whatever you want. They'll do as little or as much as you want to have them do. They don't just have to work in houses. They can work in commercial businesses. They can work in high rises. Whatever you need done, they're your go-to business to take care of that. They also can do power washing too. I cannot imagine power washing in 15 or 20 degree weather, but I'm sure they do. I guess you just put the raincoats on or something. That just sounds like the worst job ever. So I'm more than happy to let someone else do that for me. But they can do that too. So you can click, and like I said before, you can head on over to the Final Fours on the schedule /support. There you can find a link to the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, and you can get a free estimate, and you get 15% off if you mention rebound with your estimate. All right, so for the who won the rebounding, who cleaned the glass best, Coach Garland picked Mahdi, who had been on a roll, but he only had 5. I had Cooper, who finished with 2, and I think you had Malik, and he had 12. So you win. It's now 3-2. You're on a run now.
There we go. So. There we go. Like the sound of that. Thanks, Malik.
He made you look good. Yeah, my wife's sent a message. She's like, "Who did you have?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's over already." So it's not. At least I'm not going to win. All right, so let's talk about the Brothers Suggested Gutters. The player that Michigan State needed to keep in the gutter was Dawson Garcia. As you know, the Brothers Suggested Gutters will pretty much go out any weather as well and take care of your gutter problems or issues you might have, whether they're they can put in heated gutters. They can fix leaky ones. Obviously, you don't want water pooling up next to your house or foundation. It causes all kinds of problems. I had a tree growing in my gutter. So if you got any sort of the problems like that, they're the ones to call. They can clean them out. They can repair them. They can replace them. Whatever you need done. 10% off if you mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. They can come out in the west side of the state or the east side of the state, the Grand Rapids, or the Detroit or Grand Rapids area. You can find those clicks and links, obviously, just like before, at the Final Fours and schedule /support. So, like I said, it was Dawson Garcia was the player Michigan State needed to keep in the gutter, and I feel like much like last game, first half looked pretty good. Second half, he sort of got his. So he was 6 for 17 from the field, 1 for 3 from the 3-point line, 9 of 12 from the free throw line, 9 rebounds, 4 of them offensive, an assist, 4 turnovers, 22 points. He was definitely kept them in the game, but it was not a dominant performance. I mean, I've seen him where he really can hurt people, and I feel like he didn't do a ton. I mean, I guess this might be one of those pushes, right? I don't know that.
He's had 2 30-point plus games in the Big Ten this year already. And I think this is their 7th game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, you know, he was a little hard to say you kept him in the gutter when he's 3 points or 2 points. Yeah, 3 or 4 points above his scoring average. He gets 9 rebounds, 4 of them offensive. But then again, you know, 6 for 17 from the floor. He wasn't efficient there. 4 turnovers. They definitely harassed him in some ways when he had the ball. It's just the part that tilts it in his direction for me is that, yeah, you could say the 6 for 17 is not great, but when you also combine that with 9 for 12 at the line, and the 12 being maybe the most important part of that he got there for that many attempts, it's hard to say that he didn't really wear you out. Now, as I alluded to earlier, I think in the first half, they did a pretty good job on it. It was the second half where he really did a lot of his damage, and I just felt like Michigan State for the majority of this game and in the majority of ways, I thought they did a pretty good job of matching Minnesota's intensity. I did think there was a stretch where Garcia was carrying Minnesota where they were not matching him. Mm-hmm. As personified by that play you mentioned where he misses a shot. Now, he got a rebound from a missed shot somebody else took. So he gets one offensive rebound, goes up, misses the shot, and just kind of blows Carson Cooper into the stanchion and gets his own offensive rebound and puts it back in. That was emblematic of that stretch where he did just kind of take over the game for them for a while. He didn't, Michigan State was still in it. They were still scoring and themselves, but for Minnesota, Garcia was the guy during that stretch.
Yeah, I think he definitely, it was an emphasis in the second half to get the ball inside and to have him do more.
Yeah.
Because I think they probably recognized the 3-point shooting was not something sustainable, which it wasn't. And so
right.
I think both teams made adjustments at halftime.
It's a good point.
That's probably. All right, so let's go to the 5 keys to the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. You'll notice a little new segment today. We're going to just have a little question, better way of finding out more about Nudge Printing. So you'll get that in just a second. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Gabe Viscomi, owner of the fantastic sponsor to the Final Four on the schedule, Nudge Printing. We're here to take a peek behind the curtain. And so, Gabe, the first question I had for you is, what triggered you to end up in a Michigan State apparel business?
I was working at a medical imaging company out of Holt, Michigan, and we would refurbish medical imaging equipment. And what had happened was I just happened to come across this company that made stickers, and
Sure.
Because we would buy the stickers for the imaging equipment, and I reached out to them because I wanted a fat head to put on our wall at home, and I didn't want to pay for it, because at the time it was I think $150 or something. So I was I asked them if they could do it, and they're like, sure, yeah, we can do that, but you got to buy 10 of them. I was like,
right,
okay. So that turned into okay, I'll use one for myself, and then I'll sell the other ones. And so we started off doing wall decals. So actually, Nudge Printing was originally called Campus Wall Decals, which I hate. I hate that name. So we changed it to Nudge. And that's kind of how we got started. And that turned into wall decals, turned to car decals, which turned to T-shirts, which turned to hoodies, and then polos and quarter zips and the rest of the jazz.
All right, so 5 keys to the game. Again, a reminder, it's brought to you by Nudge Printing. You can get 20% off your order if you type in Final Four, just one word, into the coupon code at checkout. All right, so the first key was interior defense. Well, Michigan State, I think although we were talking about Garcia doing really well, he certainly had a lot of free throws, which suggests that he got a lot going, even though it doesn't count as field goals or points in the paint. They still limited Minnesota to 12 points in the paint. I mean, even if you add in his 9, is still 21. So I think largely a win there for Michigan State.
It's hard for me to believe they only had that production given the way Garcia was going at certain points, but I'm sure it's accurate because, Farrell Payne only had 2 buckets from the floor. Garcia only had 6 baskets from the floor. One of them was a 3. And those were really the only 2 guys. Everybody else was a jump shooter, essentially. Yep. So it does make sense.
There are no layups that are called, yeah.
Yeah. So it does make sense. I think the biggest thing was a combination of the way Michigan State played him and his foul trouble. They kept Payne in check. That's the guy who's a 10-point-a-game scorer on average for them. And he's a guy who I've seen have bigger games than that. And particularly, where Michigan State sometimes, maybe not as much as they were a couple of years ago, but sometimes they've exhibited problems holding down an opposing post player. So that's what really worried me about this game in terms of needing to deal with their interior. And I thought Michigan State did a very good job, absent, say an 8-10 minute stretch with Garcia.
Yeah, I mean, Payne finished with 7 points. He only had 2 field goals, and he was 3 or 4th on the line. And this is a guy who shoots 36% from the line.
Right.
So,
yeah,
go
it
figure.
Was exact. Believe me, every one of those free throws he hit, I was thinking about that.
Second key to the game was pace, and I think Michigan State did a very good job with the pace in a game that was slowish, I think, at times. But they really pushed when they had opportunities to. They ended up with 65 field goal attempts, which is really good. Yeah. They had fast break points. I think we're pretty accurate here. 17-2, I think is what. And so there's clearly they did a good job there. Although finishing was a problem at times, but in shots go down. But they definitely kept the pace well.
Yeah, better in the first half than the second, I think.
Yep.
But overall, yeah, not bad. And people keep talking about it, despite the fact that we seem to constantly say, you got to run more, you got to run more, you got to run more. Michigan's and I'll also say this: I think their transition effectiveness actually gets undersold by fast break points for reasons we've discussed here many times, how unreliable those numbers are. But they are top 25 in the nation in fast break points this year. So it is definitely accurate to say that part of Michigan State basketball is mostly back, even though maybe sometimes it doesn't feel that way. Mm-hmm. The statistics say otherwise.
And the third key to the game is ball movement. I don't know. What do you think about this? I think Michigan State, I didn't think they looked stagnant very often. It's just they weren't hitting shots. And so I don't know.
I thought it was certainly much better than that first half against Rutgers. And yeah, I agree with you. Like, we talked about Jaden Akins 0 for 5 from 3. Those were mostly really good looks.
Yeah. I thought
they just didn't fall.
Got good looks.
No, I think, the measure is always, or a measure is always, assists as a percentage of made field goals. They had 20 assists on 29 made field goals. So that's what you're knocking on the door 70%, right?
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah,
that's an on par number for MSU. So I think you have to be reasonably pleased with that. You also have to 20 assists to just 5 turnovers, a 4-to-1 ratio as a team.
Yeah, for the team, that's crazy.
Really, really impressive. And look, there's a lot of things you can point to. We can point to Michigan State's free throw shooting and Minnesota's 3-point shooting as an excuse for how the game was competitive for as long as it was, which was 90% of the game.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, 19 Minnesota turnovers, 5 by Michigan State. If you have a 14 turnover edge and you don't win the damn game, there's a massive problem somewhere or multiple somewheres, because that difference should be game, set, match, And by the way, almost half of those turnovers, 9 of them were Michigan State steals. I thought it's been a while, been a few games I've felt since Michigan State has really been as active as they were in this one. I thought they were active, trying to strip the ball when guys were driving, occasionally trying to, bringing a guy to dig down against a post player. They were really good. And that's just a huge advantage. But the ball movement thing I thought was pretty good. It's unfortunate that the 3-point shooting didn't reflect that, because I thought their ball movement was better than the 3-point shooting showed.
Yeah. So fourth key to the game is Mitchell. And as you mentioned, he got heated up early and he was causing all kinds of problems. He kept Minnesota in the game early in the game and then sort of faded away late.
Look, he giveth and he taketh away. 14 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists, all good. He also had 3 turnovers, and they needed him to pitch in at point, and he's really their secondary point guard, so tough on him with that. 5 of 12 from the floor overall, 3 of 9 from 3. I thought he showed for the first 3 quarters of that game why I had him listed here. But we had also talked about, you got to find ways, and this is where Michigan State, I think, whether it was by design or failure to execute, one of the things I think I remember saying was, you've got to make sure you're really contesting those shots, because he's the kind of guy that if he can get on a roll, he can just kill you. And it sure looked to me in stages of that game early on that he had really found a rhythm and found his confidence, was playing a very confident brand of basketball, not even just on the threes. He had a couple of jumpers inside the arc, which were very confident plays.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what I was worried about, because I've seen him do this against other people this season, where you see him get going, he hits a couple shots, and he's feeling it, and then he's just coming at you. And, thankfully, later in the game, I thought it was a combination of Michigan State playing much better defense against him and, frankly, him taking a couple of really bad shots.
Yeah.
LaFonso Ellis was just drilling him on a play down the stretch when Michigan State was starting to pull away, but Minnesota, they might have been down 8. So there was still enough time that, hey, if you get a bucket, you're in this. And Mitchell just jacked a 3, and he had Garcia. Garcia had buried whomever was guarding him. Might have been Malik. and was wide open for a post entry. And the way that kid was playing, and probably the least damage he was going to do was hit a layup. He might have gotten an and one or whatever, but that was just a bad decision by Mitchell. And so I think we saw both sides of the Mike Mitchell experience in this game.
And finally, matching the energy. And I think I think in large part Michigan State matched the energy Minnesota brought. And had they not, I think they would have lost this game pretty easily. But and so I think this was very good for them.
Absolutely, and that's a point worth mentioning. We were talking about the outset that you just feel a vague disappointment about the way they played, and there's certainly some numbers that support that, feeling disappointed in it. But then you think back on that game, and I think they did. Minnesota came to play. I mean, we've talked about it. This team is markedly improved over last season. They've already won more Big Ten games than they did all of last year. They're already at 3.
They're going to win more too.
They will. I don't know how many more. But they're going to win more. I agree with you. I would think there'll be Michigan State, I believe, has to go to Minneapolis in a 2 weeks or
Not
so.
too long from now. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're going to get a lot of the M&M boys, Minnesota and Maryland, coming up. We've got home and homes with those two teams over the next, and Michigan. That one's easy. But these other ones, this year, it's easy. It ought to be.
Yeah.
In Breslin, believe it. That's going to be a challenging game because at home, I would expect they're going to play at least this hard. Probably, you would think, because I haven't seen any indication that they think the Hawkins thing is, season ending. I believe he rolled an ankle. So presumably they're going to get him back by then, you would think. Hey, that's going to be a difficult game. You can't, and what you got to do to give yourself a chance is exactly what you said, that you got to find a way to match the energy and the toughness they play with. And again, absent the way they were dealing with Garcia for about an 8-10 minute stretch, I thought they did a very good job of that. Even when it was just, like I said, it was such an irritating game because you'd feel Michigan State maybe just getting ready to start pulling away. They'd go up 8, or they'd go up 5 and have the ball. Yeah. And you could feel it like this is teetering right on the edge. There were many times in that game, both halves, where I felt like they're ready to kick this into double digits and really put some distance out here. And they might just miss a shot, miss a good shot, and Minnesota comes down and jacks a 3 and it falls. There were lots of examples of that. I felt like Minnesota's threes, almost all of those 7 were really impactful. They were at moments where it felt like the game was going to tip, or moments where they could even take a lead, and they hit them. They weren't just in the flow of the game. They were big moment shots. So Michigan State was faced with a lot of that kind of adversity, quite a bit of which they earned, so to speak, by the way they played, but they still found that resiliency. Their best player took the game over offensively when it was winning time. Conversely, they didn't let Garcia continue to do the damage that he was doing at a certain point. They found a way to get him to miss some shots. Michigan State was better at the line down the stretch, than they had been for most of that game. So all those things that go along with mental and physical toughness, I thought showed up when it mattered. And truthfully, for most of the game, I thought they matched Minnesota in those areas. Certainly well enough to get the win.
Yep. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Again, just remind you to head on over to thefinalfourisontheschedule.com/support. There you can find ways to obviously support the show, but access to all our sponsors of the show. So head on over there. And also, if you, again, there's a whole Spotify thing. So if you know people in Spotify, we're working on it. And so we'll see you for the Maryland game. Until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.